about it. No.
It says also in the bottom, it says.
It's a different one.
The letter says.
It's a different one. It's a different one. Okay, it is what it is. That I forgot to turn on take it off mute until now. The Eibusher runs the world. And the next is also another letter in page 141. Somebody asks the question, why is it that he asks her, as Moshkovitz says, if you say that there's no Reshus Harabim B'zman Hazeh, there's so many questions that the Reshus Harabim, so many places that the Reshus Harabim is mentioned. Didn't Reshus Harabim mention Shulchan Aruch? Why is it? If it's not relevant, why do you have to mention it? So he says like this. First of all, Kama Inyanim B'zman Hazeh Goyzer P'nei L'Chlufi. Some things even today were Goyzer because people might make mistakes. Some places the Shulchan Aruch points out that B'zman Hazeh is not Shaykh. Rubon Gachon Shin Reshus Harabim Medabrim Bichlal. The majority are discussing the general idea of Reshus Harabim, not a specific place. But to a situation when you will have a Reshus Harabim which is Gomor. Now, how do you calculate this Shishim Riboy? In the city, in the street? When you look in Shimim Hey, the simon that we discussed until now, in Sif Yud Aleph, the Lashon Alter Rebbe Yeshemim Shekol Shein Shishim Riboy Oivrim Boy, people crossing in that over there, boy in it, then it's Bechol Yoim, every day 600,000 people going through it, is not Reshus Harabim, which seems to imply the streets. Right? In the Kuntra Sachren, Sifkot and Beis, in this simon. One second. I'll tell you exactly where it is. It's a long one, I have to find where it is. On page Taf Reish Ayin Beis, in also, when he discusses over here, he also mentions that there are 600,000 Shishim Riboy Boikim on the tail and on the Sfas Hayam, on the specific area which we're discussing, and doesn't mention that it's the city. The city is mentioned in the Beis Yosef. But from Alter Rebbe over here, he says, and he continues, says, in this area, and over here, there's 600,000 people pass in this specific area. Same thing you see in Shin Nun Zayin, if Zayin. One second. He says, "Afilu b'zman hazeh sheyesh omrim she'ein lanu reshus harabim gemura b'nei she'ein shishim rabim boikim bo," that they're going through this in this area. Same thing also in Shin Samach Gimel. second. Also, you have it in. Find the sieve. The end of Seif in Seif Membeis. לאוימרים שהם בכיס הרבים חשוב ולעשות ששוס הרבים מכנם שישים ריבוי כמו שזרם שישים ממהי אף כאן אין בכיס הרבים מבט ממנו שהם מחיצה אלא אם כן בויקים בוי שישים ריבוי בכל יום crossing in it 16 each time. So from all these places so far it seems like it goes based on the street. If you have the street, then that street has shishim riboy. But there are places where it seems differently. For example, if you look in the same Shinun Zayin, Sif Zayin, which I mentioned before, where over there it discusses about if you pour water from your house to a Reshus Harabim or to a Carmelis, when because of your strength the water is spilled from into the Carmelis of Reshus Harabim. And over here he says that the shit of the Yeshayimrim, he says she'ein chiluk bein Reshus Harabim leCarmelis, and it's only in Yamim and Neharis. And then he says, אפילו קרמל שביבשה לא שהיא חוץ לעיר, שגם כן אין מסחלפת ברשוס הרבים גמורה, שאין דרך לי רבים מצויים כל כך חוץ לעיר, כשיעור בכיס רבים ברשוס הרבים גמורה. אבל קרמל שבסייך העיר מסחלפת ברשוס הרבים גמורה, אפילו בזמן זה שיש רשוס הרבים גמורה, בשאין שישים בויקים בו, מכל מוקם היא מסחלפת היא בעיר גדולה שיש בה שישים ריבוי. You could look at it, you could see that it's people are going to get confused between a city which has shishim riboy and a city which doesn't have shishim riboy. So here suddenly we introduce the concept that the idea of shishim riboy is not about a street, but it's about the actual city has 600,000 people. So any city which has 600,000 people, if you have any area within the city which has 60 ames, that automatically becomes a Reshus Harabim, even if you don't have 600,000 people going through this specific street. That's one example of a place where a city is mentioned. Also in Shin Tzadik Beis, Seif Aleph, when it discusses a city which is a city which belongs to somebody which he built it for himself, it's not considered like a Reshus Harabim Gemura. And over here, in the end of the Siv, it says, "L'divrei ha'oimrim, shekol Reshus Harabim she'en shishim riboy boikim bo b'chol yom ein Reshus Harabim Gemura." You have and he says ein tzorich, and he says ein tzorich lasos shiur le'ir shel rabim l'inkan shishim riboy boikim bo b'chol yom. He's discussing the concept when you have to make in a ir shel yachid, you have to make a shiur, a certain area which does not have a eruv. And he says a city which does not have 600,000 people, you don't have to make this shiur. So again, the concept is over here that the city has 600,000 people and not the actual streets. Similarly, you have also in Shinun Hey in the Kuntras Achren, Sifkot and Gimel, which is over here in Shinun Hey, in Seif Tesvav, the Alter Rebbe is discussing that you have to have a mechitza in mechitza tluya for a certain reason. He says over here that you don't need shishim riboi to mevatel the mechitza. Only in Rashut Harabim you need shishim riboi to be mevatel mechitza. And between the words over here, if you go towards the end of the first paragraph of the Kuntres Achron, he also says, "Lamachma she'ein shishim riboi be'ir." Yeah, the actual topic, again, I'm not going to discuss now, but the idea that he also mentions, there are no shishim riboi in this city. So we have certain places where you could say that the Alter Rebbe is talking about the specific street needs shishim riboi, and certain places where the specific city, it's a city needs shishim riboi, not every specific street. Now, if you put your head to it, you could explain, you could find for each one of the places where the city is mentioned to say why those specific cases, it doesn't mean shishim riboi in the city, and the same thing you could say in each place where you discuss a shishim riboi in the street. You could say that it doesn't really mean a street, it means a city. You could explain all of them whichever way you want. The reason why it's important to know this, again, because when you will be dealing with such a scenario, if you want to know all the kulas, then you have to know. You'll be able to find each thing. You could find all the things that say 600,000 people and 600,000 people in this city and everything else. If you want to do it properly to cover all grounds, then you have to do it in the way you have to know at least all the Mekayres of 600,000 people refers to a city, and that maybe 16 amas, even if there's no 600,000 people.
Is there a way to explain how 600,000 people walk in the street?
Walk in the street?
Walk in the street. You can explain without the places that came out of the
Yeah.
to understand the disease of the 600,000 people on the street.
How could it be 600,000 people on the street?
Yeah,
No, come tomorrow, you'll see it.
Yeah?
How many people go over here tomorrow?
Okay, so you're saying it's
I don't know, look. It's not one day, it's b'chol yom, it's b'chol yom. Has to be b'chol yom. Has to be b'chol yom. The 1 day a year is nothing, it has to be b'chol yom.
If there's 1 day a year they don't do it, is that enough to take away?
No, b'chol yom means every day, it's a common days. Common days, yeah. The way to do it is it's not shaykh to have one street unless you're talking about, unless you count the streets which feed into it and all the people that spill out from the streets. It's very hard to get one street which has 600,000 people in it. Metzias, What? It's not foolish. No, it ends in the wall and starts with something. It's not foolish. There's nothing foolish here anyways. I'm saying Lu Yitzur, if you want to know 600,000 people fitting into one place, you could look. I'm not saying this specific street.
Every street is no foolish.
Every street ends in a wall. Every street ends in a wall except for the Belt Parkway. Every street ends in a wall. Wall. Anywhere you go, you're going to hit a wall.
Claudia, how do you look at it as like 60,000 and
600,000.
No, I'm saying I'll tell you to take it both ways.
Yeah.
What's the
Anganum and Shitta is that when you make an Eruv for a city, you try to find all the coolest possible, and when you try to make an Eruv for yourself, you don't. You make it and you don't use it. Okay, that is regarding the 600,000 people. Now, what is mefulish? Yeah, we mentioned that mefulish, Alter Rebbe says mefulish means that the sharim, the doors are parallel, one on each side, they're mechuven one against each other.
So basically, you just proved that basically what the author says is no shizrabi is true, still in the now. Where are you going to have?
If you're going to say that it goes based in the street, then there's no Rosh Hashanah Mizmanazah. It's not Shach, Rosh Hashanah. You don't have any place where you have a street with 600,000 people, huh?
I was telling you, this whole back and forth about whatever said about that Rosh Hashanah. If it wasn't, he didn't mean what he wrote, but it's not necessarily, he didn't say that the fact that things could change. But you're saying
things could definitely change.
Yeah, but I'm saying
Metzias is very hard to have, yeah. Metzias right now is if you go based in the street, you don't have 600,000 people. A city you have, this is...
No, I'm saying for Boykin on the actual street.
And actually it's very hard to have. Every day?
Is it ever shaykh? Is there an answer to this question I have to...
Is it ever shaykh that should be 600,000 people?
It wasn't like that with man mission. And it's not like that any Metzias matter.
Metzias, I never saw anywhere,
So say Im Shram is man hazeh, The Alter is speaking about a Metzias that changed from the times of Shemana Shas.
Yeah, it's probably a city. Doesn't make more sense to go based in the city.
Yeah. You can explain the Sugis, but you can't explain the Metzias. The Metzias are talking about something.
The Metzias, yeah, it makes more sense to say that it goes based in the city. You could explain it, you could deal with the Yukim, but if you look at the Metzias makes more sense to say that it's a city which has 600,000 people, because in Europe, a lot of the cities, most of the cities, did not have 600,000 people.
No.
Huh?
No.
London had, I think.
No, you didn't.
No, you didn't in London, but we count 600 as Goyim also. Very few cities had, maybe later, they had in the 1900s, started having 600,000 people in the city. Otherwise, there's no 600,000 people in any city where Yidden lived. Now we're going to move to the topic of Mefulish. So Mefulish in Shin Mem Hey in Sifi, I don't know if we're going to have enough time to finish it today, but at least we'll start it. We say that you have that what's considered a Reshus Harabim, to be able, if there's a wall around the city, you have to have Mefulish from one end to the other end. The doors are directly across from each other. Do we need mefulish in every scenario or not? That means, first of all, does it mean there has to be east and west? You have one door in the east, one door in the west, and a straight street going from one to another? Or could it be a door in the east and a door in the north and the street takes a turn? Or could it be a door in the east, door in the west, and the street goes up and down, and it's still considered mefulish? Tzemach Tzedek takes a very extreme approach. You look in the Chidushim al Hashas, it's page 66 in your book. Not 66, sorry. Page 80 in your book. Page 81, which is Lamed Gimel, second side of page Lamed Gimel in the Chidushim. There is a long paragraph, long section from the Tzemach Tzedek. Over here, the Tzemach Tzedek discusses what's the din when you have a mavoi, which is shaped like a reish, like a dalid. It's open, it's not straight from one end to another end. It's open, one opening is, let's say, facing north, and one opening is facing east. And both of its openings are open to a Reshus Harabim, and this reish, dalid, is 16 amas wide. But it's clear that it's not mechovin one to another. One is open facing Mizrach or Ma'ariv, and one is open facing Tzafon or Darim. So he says, the Tzemach Tzedek says, Yesh Stapik, he has a question, what's the din? Because the two heads of the mav are not mechovin one against each other, do we consider it like mefulish, or we don't consider it like mefulish? There is a svara according to Rav to say that we do consider it like mefulish, and it's mamash Reshus Harabim. Or we could take a different approach. What Rav is talking about, the Gemara is talking about the mavoi, which is open to a Reshus Harabim, but not regarding the actual din of a Reshus Harabim. And when you have a mavoi that is open to Reshus Harabim, being that the whole idea of the mavoi that's open to Reshus Harabim is for overflow of people, hiluch Harabim over this. Therefore, we don't care if the opening is not mechovin, but when we're discussing an actual Reshus Harabim, we do care if the openings are mechovin. There's two ways of looking at it. Either we say by Reshus Harabim we do need, by this mavoi, we look at it that even because it's open from both, even though it's not mechovin one against each other, it's still considered a Reshus Harabim. Or we say no, what the Gemara says about this mavoi, the terosik and mefulish, is not Inyan din Reshus Harabim, but if you want to discuss din Reshus Harabim, you have to have it open from both ends. So he says, first of all, from the Lashon of Rashi, it's mashma that it has to be that if it twists in the middle, it's not considered mefulish. Then he continues and he says, if a mavoi is wide 16 amas, and it does take twists in the middle, we could say that it is considered a Reshus Harabim, even if the doors are not open even if the doors are not directly parallel one to another, one is in Tzaf and one is in Mizrach, but it's one street going from one end to another, it should still be considered a Reshus Harabim, and you do need to put actual doors and lock them at night. And he says that's how it's a mashma from the Ritva. He brings the shitta of the Shas HaTshuvas Mayim Rabim. Now what does it mean, mefulosh mitzad al tzad? Doesn't mean that the street is straight. It means that the street doesn't have another street, which that one becomes mefulosh. But if this street is mefulosh from end to end, then even if it turns and it twists and everything else, it's still considered a Reshus Harabim. That means if the same street starts in one end and ends in another side, even if it's twists and turns and doesn't start east to west or whichever way it goes, it's still considered a Reshus Harabim. The Lashon of the Tzemach Tzedek over here says, after he brings the opinions, he says mashma that in Platia you don't need the same conditions. You know what Platia is? Platia is the marketplace. Marketplace, you don't need the same conditions as a Reshus Harabim like in a Mavoi. As long as the Platia is in the city and it has the Tnoim for Reshus Harabim, which is 16 amas wide, it's considered a Reshus Harabim. And therefore, if you have a Mavoi that goes from one end to a street is Reshus Harabim, and from the other end it goes to a Stratia and it's wide 16 amas, it is considered mefulish from side to side, even though it's not a straight pillar, and it's considered a Reshus Harabim. And he brings an example from the city of Lubavitch. It says, K'moi b'Yireinu Lubavitch. He says that's in the middle of the second column on page 81 in your book. Yeah, he describes Lubavitch. He says, what's the city Lubavitch? Even though the streets are wider than 16 amas, we could have said maybe it's not Reshus Harabim. Why? Because the streets are not mefulish from one end of the city to the other end of the city. Why is that? Because the opening to the Mesila Elechas Leir Dubravne, the highway that leads to Dubravne, that one is on one side, and the other side, the highway that goes to Vitebsk or to Rudnia, are not one in front of another. One is on one side going in one direction, one is on another side. They're not parallel to each other in any way, shape, or form. So we could have said maybe it's not a Reshus Harabim, maybe it's a Mavoi Yakum. But he says no, because these two streets, these two openings to the highway are open to the Platia, to the main marketplace in the city where everybody goes, the main marketplace of town, then all of them are considered the Reshus Harabim. The marketplace is considered the Reshus Harabim. And the street which is open, so now the marketplace is the Reshus Harabim. The street which is open from one end to the highway, to the Dubravne, and the other end to the marketplace is also Reshus Harabim. And the street that's open to Vitebsk, to the highway to Vitebsk in one end, and to the marketplace in the other end is also Reshus Harabim. Because the marketplace by itself is also considered a Reshus Harabim by its own right, without any additional help. That means the fact that you have the fact that you have a Reshus Harabim does not have to be open from both ends. The two ends of the city, the Sharim have to be mechuven against each other. A Platia, what he's trying to say is that a Platia does not need to have mefulish from side to side. The Platia is a Reshus Harabim by definition. If it has 16 amas and people use it, it doesn't have to have an opening on one end and an opening on the other end. The openings have to be directed against each other. So that's what he says in Lubavitch. You have one entrance over here, one entrance over here, and it goes into a Platia, and from a Platia it goes to the next one. That's all. Each one is open to a Reshus Harabim. One is open to a Platia into a highway. One is open to a Platia into a highway. So those two streets are Reshus Harabim, and the main Platia is Reshus Harabim regardless of where it's open to. He says, and therefore it's considered Reshus Harabim according to all those, to the people which hold that you don't need shishim ribui. He says, so Taka, according to the Rambam, if the doors are locked, it does not become a Reshus Harabim. It's no longer a Reshus Harabim. The Rashba is of the opinion that a platya, even if it has locked doors, it's not considered a Reshus Harabim, but the Rashba is a Das Yachid. However, he says that only applies in a city which is Mukav Chayma. But if you have a city which is not Mukav Chayma, so then a street which has a definition of a Reshus Harabim is considered a Reshus Harabim even if it's not mefulish from side to side. Only a mavoi which opens to Reshus Harabim, that's the ones which have to be mefulish and has to have the sha'arim mechuvanim according to each other. Why? Because a lot of people go through it. But if it's a marketplace where people go and use it, and it's not a ir mukefes chayma, it's a Reshus Harabim even without having sha'arim mechuvanim. And therefore, if you have streets which come out of the marketplace, once we define the marketplace as Reshus Harabim, it's 16 amas wide, and a lot of people go, that's the main marketplace, and you have streets going out of that one. So even if they're not mechuvan, for example, if one opening goes to a north, one opening goes west, it's still, and they're not parallel against each other, being that it's open from both ends, and the both ends doesn't mean that it's open directly one parallel to each other. It is open, you could enter from one side and walk out the other side. You're not hitting a dead end. As long as you're not hitting a dead end, you continue walking from one side, you enter and you exit, that's already considered mefulish as long as it has 16 ames wide. And it concludes that tzarich if Take brings a proof, maybe in Platya you do need mechuvan mishal and he leaves it as a tzarich, but he does seem to be machmir that by a platya, things which are not the mechuvan mitzad letzad, sha'arim mechuvanim is only a condition when you have a walled city and you have one street that goes from one side to another side, then you have to figure out the mechuvanim or by a mavoi. But if it has the definition of Reshus Harabim regardless of the opening, then as long as you could walk from one side to the other side, you don't need sha'arim mechuvanim one against each other. That's what it says over here. Now the same idea you're going to have also in a few pages later, on page 89, where also he discusses a similar idea over here, same one we saw before. And over here he mentions that and he references what he wrote earlier in what we saw before, the paragraph called the Gemara Dibur Maschil in page 80, I don't know which one he's referring to over here. He says that Platya, in the end of the first column on page 89, he says that Platya have Reshus Harabim af al pi she'ein pilush of mechuvanim zelazeh. He says again, a Platya, over here also he mentioned that a Platya is not considered Reshus Harabim even if the openings are not mechuvan one against each other. However, there's a tshuva from the Tzemach Tzedek, which is also in your book, and it's on page 68. It's a very short tshuva. Page 68, it's Siman Pei Gimel in the new prints, and Siman Tzaddik Hey, or the Chaim Siman Tzaddik Hey in the old prints. He says the Platya, even if it has 4 walls on each side, even if each side has a mavoi open to it, which is 16 amas wide, we say midiraisa is not a Reshus Harabim. Yeah, which is a complete opposite of what we just said in the Chidushim, that you have that the Platya is a Reshus Harabim regardless of a situation, and that the mavois which are open to a Platya are considered Reshus Harabim if they're wide 16 amas. Yeah, this short tshuva over here. So I don't know which one was written first. I can't tell you if the tshuva was written before the chidushim were written before the tshuva. So I don't know what's considered a Mishnah Rishain and Mishnah Achrein, you could explain that even the tshuva still will fit with the chidushim, because over here we're talking about a specific scenario when it is actually walled, the merubah oimed al aparot, and therefore has a separate din because of the walls and nothing to do with the 16 amas. And we still remain that a platya, a something which has a reshus harabim by its own definition, it doesn't need anything. If it's a reshus harabim from its own accord, without any additional need to have any other conditions, like a platya, it's a reshus harabim not because of its size and not because of its distance, but it's a reshus harabim because of its use, then it's considered a reshus harabim, even if it doesn't have all the conditions of a reshus harabim that is open from both ends. The conditions of a reshus harabim that is open from both ends is when you have an area which is 16 amas wide, but it doesn't serve another purpose. So if you have a highway or something, if you have something which is a reshus harabim by its own definition, whether it is because it's a marketplace or because it's a highway or anything else which has a reshus harabim by its own definition, then we don't need the Tanai of Mefulashim. As long as it's 16 amas wide, it becomes a reshus harabim. And obviously, if it's not closed off, it doesn't end in a dead end. If it ends in a dead end, then you don't have any more, it can't be reshus harabim. Midiraisa, it's a reshus yachid. It's open, it's closed from three sides. The only way it's a reshus harabim is if it's open from both sides. But once you have something which is open from both sides, if it's a reshus harabim by its own definition, because it's a marketplace or because it's a street, then it's considered a reshus harabim regardless. And if it's not a reshus harabim because of its own concept, but rather the only reason why it's a reshus harabim is because it's wide and because it's open to something else, then we have to have the conditions to make it mefulish, because you have to follow the logic. What's the logic why a mavoi that's open to the reshus harabim is considered a reshus harabim? Because when people are going to walk off the reshus harabim, they need extra space to go. They're going to go off the street and they're going to go through there. They're going to use it as a shortcut. They're going to use it as a place to go. So then, if you use it as a shortcut, you have to have enough place to go through it. It has to be wide, it has to be long, it has to be able to go somewhere. Nobody goes into a shortcut that doesn't take you anywhere. That ends in a dead end, or that ends in a forest. Obviously, it has to serve a use. So if the only use it has is an overflow of reshus harabim, so then you have to have the conditions. It's open from both ends. The doors have to be one against each other, one open and one open. And obviously it doesn't mean that the street has to be directly straight from one to another. I didn't mention it before, but the street doesn't have to be straight, that when you stand on one end, you see the other end. Even those, as long as it doesn't take a sharp turn, it's considered still a reshus harabim. When it comes to the sharp turn that we say it's still considered a reshus harabim is when the actual street serves a purpose by itself without having to have any other Tanai in the reshus harabim. And with that, we're going to conclude for today. We'll be mamshech. There'll be another share on Thursday regarding Ceirovin, and Mir Hashem, there's going to be a share on Sukkah at 4:15.